Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good day, a good night, a good whatever part of this day you're in. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're calling in from. Maybe if you've been to a workshop before, how'd you hear about Mastra, all that different good stuff. I'm calling in from San Diego. Pretty nice sunny morning this morning. Then Eduardo, Xavier, you guys up in the Bay Area, yeah?
Yes, sir. We're in the heart of it.
Amazing. What's the weather looking like for you guys? You also sharing some sunny good vibes?
Honestly, yeah, because like the weekend looked not great, to be honest. It was incredibly foggy here. So, normal summer day in SF, but I feel like today is looking a little bit better.
Amazing. Nice. We got Utah. Oh, Utah's so beautiful. I just drove through Utah like 2 weeks ago. So beautiful. Buenos Aires, Montreal, France, all around the world. Wow. Ukraine. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We're just going to wait to let any stragglers come in. Italy. Oh, very jealous of Italy. Nice. I don't think we've repeated the same country twice. This is awesome.
Pretty cool.
I see Mexico City as well, I think. Bangalore.
Yeah, we got US, Canada,
Kyiv.
and Mexico all covered. And feel free to put in the chat, have you been to a workshop before? Are you a veteran? Is this your first one? Several workshops. Yeah, I think I might have. I recognize your name, Coderberry. I can tell you're a dedicated regular, and we appreciate you. Nice. Eric Berry. We'll just give it one more minute here. We'll start it. Well, 9:05 my time. I know different times for everyone else. Oh, you're also in San Diego? Let's go. The first city with two. I just moved here like a week and a half ago now, so very, very fresh resident to the city, but so far so good.
I'm sure the weather must be nicer in San Diego.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Brendan, you should also take time and go to the Channel Islands that I know are like, I don't know, an hour off San Diego. It's like a nice little weekend trip. You should do, honestly.
No, I used to live in Los Angeles, and then I like had a little stint in New York in between, and there's so many day trips that I just never did during my 3 years in Los Angeles. So I'm trying to be much more proactive about doing those. And Nicholas, so past workshops, they're all on our YouTube channel. So since we go live for all of them, if you just go to Mastra's YouTube channel, go under like the live section, you should see all past recordings. And that's like these kinds of workshops. We also have our workshops where we talk about like internal features that we're building out, and Agents Hour, which is our podcast with Abhi and Shane, our CTO and CPO. All right. I think with that, we can get started here. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming along. So today we have a super exciting workshop. We have Xavier and Eduardo here from Mora, which is an AI analytics platform. They're going to chat a lot more about all the great things Mora does, but they're also going to talk a bit about how they're using Mastra and specifically how you can add authoritative context to your agent. So just really quickly to set the stage a little bit on how today's going to go. In just a minute, I'm going to pass it over to them. They're going to basically talk to you more about Mora and then dive into how they're using Mastra within their product. They're going to go in through a few specific examples, and then from there, going to pass it back to me, and I'm just going to dive into Studio, show you guys a little bit about what's going on under the hood for what they're building, and a few cool things you can do with Mastra as well. So with that in mind, now we can get to the fun stuff. I'm happy to introduce Eduardo and Xavier, and you guys feel free to take it from here and dive in. Oh, and along the way, feel free to just send any questions in the chat. At the end, we'll have time to go through all of them, but also throughout the presentation, I'll try to dig out ones that might be specifically relevant. But feel free just throughout this whole time to send your questions in there.
Awesome. So just for a little bit of context before we dive deep, so you guys have like some framing and context of like, what are these guys doing? What exactly is the product that, Mastra is powering here? So you can check it out. It's Mora.com. As Brandon correctly said, it's an AI analytics tool. So if you've used like a Tableau or a Metabase, it's a much better AI native way of doing those things. And in terms of like how Mastra powers that, there are like 4 key surfaces, like our agent has to, interact with. And one of the cool things from like a philosophy perspective of how we built it is like, to us, it shouldn't matter if it's a GUI, if it's the agent, or if it's, sort of like in chat AI experience. All of that should work the same way. And so there's like 4 key surfaces that the agent has to power, right? There's the SQL editor, which you can see here in the screenshot. So it's like, hey, I'm working super, on a super complex SQL query that measures, I don't know, our cost of goods sold or like our inventory or whatever it is. So very much like if you were using in something like Cursor. There's also the dashboard builder. So it's not just like, hey, create me a report on what's going on, but also move blocks around, change the color of the chart, change the chart type, etc. So very different use case. The third is sort of like a dedicated chat experience so that you can, have a conversation back and forth, kind of like ChatGPT, but, for your data. And then the fourth is like our MCP, right? So everything that I've said should also be able to happen through MCP. That's personally how we like to build dashboards and stuff for customers. So all of this is being powered by Mastra under the hood. But yeah, hopefully that gives you a better idea. And again, you can go to Mora.com. It's free. You can play with it to give you a better idea of how things work. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the only bit of context there.
Thank you, Hobby. Awesome. So yeah, as Hobby just like correctly mentioned, and as you could picked out, a lot of like the issues that we run into when building Mora is that we have different people or agents that access maybe like one same object at the same time, and that produce like a very concurrent, it always show up issue, which is when an agent tries to edit something that a user might have modified along the way, the agent might not get the latest or freshest item to edit on. And that's basically what we're trying to like showcase, a way of how you can think about this and some potential solutions to this. And we're gonna like jump real quick into like a demo, but here I wanna like set up like the stage. Imagine you have like a query, and just like look at the one on the right here, where it's just, you're just like selecting a customer ID, summing the price, marking it as revenue from a table called orders. Let's say the user wants to modify, the user like realize like, oh my God, like actually like for the revenue, I want to make sure to add like a quantity, but like the agent is like working on something else. What might happen in some cases, even if you set up Mastra in like the preferred way without doing any changes, it might set up like an error where like the agent ignores the user's modification to the SQL query. And it doesn't have to be like a SQL query. I think for our purposes, we're using like a SQL query just because it's easier to showcase. And for the demo, it's easier to like demo as well. You'll see in like a bit. But the idea is that how do we solve this? And I'll jump right ahead into like a demo that we have prepared here. So as you can see, we have this SQL query. And I want to show, first of all, that this can work normally. So if I do like, only include orders over $50, the agent will try and generate like a query, and it's going to edit it normally. So it modified this thing. It just added this extra filter Perfect, beautiful. So let's see what happens if I do now, if I do price times quantity, as we said in the thing, and now I tell the agent also to add a limit of 100 rows. Let's see what happens. Okay, so like as you can see, like the agent added like the limit, but it ignored or it went over and reverted my change. So what's happening here? There's a couple of things, and I do want to show you, like, as part of the system prompt that we're giving it, we do have like the SQL query. So if I do put the quantity here, I do want to show you that it will come up as part of like the system prompt. So let's see. So what's happening here? I think the issue is like a recency issue, right? So the agent is treating the system prompt as not the freshest thing. It has it in memory, and hopefully we can see that later in like the traces, but it does have the latest SQL query. It just doesn't treat it as the most freshest item because it has the user prompt and its memory in the way. So this is like a good like diagram of like what's going on. So basically we're putting like the source of truth, which in this case is the SQL query. We are injecting it into the system prompt. But what happens is that when it gets to the LLM, the order of recency is regarded in such a way that it treats what it has seen in either its memory or a user prompt as the fresher thing. So in the example that I was showing, because I had added like a limit of 100 rows, or because I did this filtering query, it treats what it saw here as the most recent SQL query. So that's like a big issue. And there are some ways to fix this. One of them, as you can see here, is providing the agent, instead of like passing it through the system prompt, it's by giving it a tool that allows the LLM to call a tool that gets the whole SQL query or a part of like that object that you're trying to modify. This can work in some scenarios, but if you want to have more authoritative control of what gets passed down, you might not think that tools is like the right way to go because it depends a lot on the LLM actually calling that tool. And you can do some hacks where you have like in the system prompt, you can tell it like, hey, always call like the fresh SQL query tool to get the latest SQL query. But from my experience, that doesn't always necessarily happen. And again, I just want to say some caveats around like this setup. You know, this is pretty much a normal, the base setup. I don't want to say it's like what Mastra recommends, but it's like the quickest setup that you can have. Like it's just like an agent. In this case, it's being powered by an OpenAI model. I don't remember exactly which one it is. And yeah, it's just like a regular thing. As you can see, like we have like, this is like the system prompt, and it's asking like, hey, just like do like the query. There's nothing sketchy about like the system prompt, meaning like I'm not asking it to fail or anything like that. This is just what it did from a blank, pretty naive implementation of like an agent. So what is this? Oh, okay, and this is basically like showcasing like the system prompt where we're actually passing like a query, and the agent just like decided to ignore it. So what can we do? So Mastra has this really powerful idea called input and output processors, which basically allows you to inject into what the LLM sees, whatever you want. So we, in our use case, in Mora's use case, we use this quite a lot to give that context to the agent in a fresh, with like high recency, opinionated way. So what does this look like? It's pretty straightforward. I can share the documentation later on, but basically in this case, we're just implementing their own processor object and extending it to fit our needs. So in this case, we're basically passing in like the prompt and injecting a phantom message that the LLM will read, and you can just like pass whatever you want as part of this message to the agent. Let's see how that looks as in a demo. So here I'm just gonna like come over here, reset the demo, and now I'm just gonna turn the processor on. This basically just switches from my agent that doesn't have the processor to one that has the processor. As you can see here, is basically this is like what I decided like my message to look like. It's basically telling, hey, this is like the freshest query that you'll have right now. So, and I'm gonna just do like the exact same steps as before. I'm gonna ask it to modify a filter, to add like a filter. So it's thinking, it added it. I'm gonna come in and add my quantity column into the revenue thing. And as you can see, it is being pulled in. I am also giving this, I'm not showing it here, but I am also giving it the same system prompt to this agent. So that stays the same. You can feel free to like decide whether or not you want to like remove like the query from like the system prompt to save some caching. It might be a good idea because like usually how a lot of like LLM providers work is that they reuse the cache. So if you have like your full system prompt to be static, that helps quite a lot with the caching mechanism that they do. So you ideally want to keep that as static as you can so that it can reuse and reduce the price per call for specific rerunning queries. But yeah, so I just like changed this. I'm gonna now ask it to add a limit of 100 rows again, and let's see if it keeps my quantity there. There we go. So as you can see, it added the limit and it didn't remove our quantity. So that's pretty much a successful demo right there. As you can see, it didn't take much, you know. I could show like the code if there's like any interest in that, like the actual code that I'm using, but it's basically gonna be very similar to what you guys see here. So again, this text here is literally just gonna be this guy over here. The cool thing about using the input processor is that you have access to a bunch of other things that Mastra provides, like your request context. You're gonna be able to extract it from over here. Like if you expand, you're gonna be able to have like your request context. You're gonna be able to run anything that you want powered by your own system. Like you can do like your own like API calls. You can fetch your database here. That's basically what we're doing in Mora. We basically do like a database fetch. You can get as simple or as complex as you want here. So, because like again, like the idea is for you to have control over what gets sent to the agent. If you don't want to send anything else, you can literally just like send back like the prompt entry, which is basically like what was already there, and not do anything. So you have that optionality of like deciding whether or not you need to show this to your agent, which can save you some tokens. You know, like ideally you don't necessarily want to run this every time, or it's gonna be like a per use case by case basis, right? Maybe you do want to always give it to them. In our case, we do some more complicated ways of fetching the SQL query, because like if a SQL query is like really big, you don't necessarily want to give like the whole part. You might want to be able to just give it like a section or the relevant part, like a SQL query or like an object that you want like the agent to look at or modify. So again, the idea is here that you have control. Yes, absolutely. Like this can be async. Great question. As I mentioned, we could call, you could fetch data from your own database, so that would require it to be async. So you can do like a bunch of like logic here. Obviously, you want to be smart around what you're fetching, right? Because this will hold up a user's experience. But yeah, so to picture a little bit more of how this is working, right? Like we're using like the previous flow, and now you can see that like the source of truth is being injected at this spot right after the user prompt, the memory, and like the system prompt. So you can see how the recency for something like this would be much higher, and the agent would give it a bunch more importance to that message that you put in there. That's pretty much it. I think like something that's like not in the demo is like the output processor. One of the reasons for that is that for the demo, we didn't want to put, what is it? Like the output processor is usually very efficient to modify the saved prompts into the message. For now, in like the code that we used process LLM request. You have a different options here, but this one basically you can do in place, meaning it doesn't get saved to the memory. So as you can see in like the demo, you don't necessarily show us part of like the message history or like the conversation, the data that was like modified. I did add it here, but if you review like the database and you see like the messages that are actually saved, you don't necessarily see the injected text as part of that conversation. And you have to be careful because I think if you use the other function, I don't remember what it's called right now. I think I might have it here, but if you use like the one that like it's like by default in the page, it will actually write that message into your message query, which can be useful as well. Like sometimes maybe you want to like inject some sort of like message either by the user or the assistant, right? You can just like share this and like it will show up as being sent by the users themselves, which can sometimes be a little bit weird. In my case, I prefer putting it like as the user because like from my own testing, the agent gives a little bit more importance to messages that are by the user as well. So I just like inject this as a user message, but you could change this and have it be stored in like the conversation list as a assistant message, which will then show up as like, hey, like another box here, right? Where it was like sent by the assistant. If you have that need, you can very easily do that where it's like, oh, like I'm reading the freshest SQL query and you can see the SQL query, but it's very flexible. So it's like a really cool like feature that like Mastra provides. You can extend it however you want. You can get all the objects and state that Mastra provides. So very flexible thing. But with that said, I think that's pretty much the gist of it. I'm just like looking at the questions now. So Sebastian, yeah, great question. So yes, absolutely. I don't think the idea behind this is only for SQL queries. Absolutely not. That's definitely not what I want you to get from this whole demo. And it's funny because like actually for our use case, the first thing that we really needed it for was for modifying objects. So we had like a JSON object that we stored that controlled basically how a chart looks, and a lot of like times we basically manually modified like the color and then told the agent like, hey, actually no, can you switch like a different color for this other part of like the chart, and we started noticing how it always like reverted to the original color and not the one that we put in manually. And that's when we started like doing all this like exercises and testing to see what was really going on, and that's where we decided to use input processors. But it is very versatile, so you can use it for whatever you want. Like for SQL query, it was just like a good demo, I guess, which you can like try and like simulate how we would use that in our own application. But it's you can use it for whatever you want. As long as, I think like the main idea here is that if it's something that gets modified a lot, or that gets modified by multiple people, be it users or agents, it's good to have like a more authoritative way of how you give the latest, most fresh version of an object. Be that a SQL query or like a value in a database. It could be like a chunk of text. If you're doing like an editor app, you know, it could be anything really. If there are no questions for this section, I think, Brandon, if you wanted to show anything or if you wanted to say anything, but I'm happy to take the questions as we go as well.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll take over from here and demo a few things from Studio. Thank you so much, Eduardo. That was awesome. Really cool to see. And I think also to touch on the question we just had before, I think this goes back to, you know, a big pattern we see in Mastra, which is we give you sort of all these different tools like working memory, input processors, output processors. Obviously, you can do your own prompt engineering, but there's all these different ways to sort of handle like context and memory within an agent. So there's no like one size fits all for all this stuff, but there's totally a bunch of use cases you would use something like this for. But yeah, with that in mind, I'll if you don't mind stopping sharing screen, I'll share really quick and then just dive into Studio. And then, yeah, in the meantime, I'm just going to dive in pretty quickly. So feel free, if you have any questions, make sure you get them in the chat, and then we'll take a few minutes at the end to cover them. But with that in mind, let me share my screen. Okay, awesome. So sorry in advance, this is going to be a bit of a text-heavy screen sharing moment, but what I have here is two Studio instances side by side that just display the different agents we are looking at. So first, we have the one that has the query in the system prompt, and second, we have the one that has the query injected into every turn, the one that uses this input processor. So I just want to take a look at them side by side and go into the traces and take a peek at what is actually different there. So on this side, I'll go into the original one we have. Let's go into this trace. And then over here, gonna go into traces and we'll find the same trace here. I believe it is this one. Awesome. And what we'll see, I'll actually show what I did there again. So within this trace, we see all these different sections. We're going to navigate into the input processor section here. And first, I'll quickly show here. Let's see if we can zoom out a little bit to get the text a little bit more clear. So this is the input here, and we'll see that we have the prompt. And this confirms sort of what Eduardo was saying before. We actually have the query in the prompt here, but it still doesn't work well enough as like an authoritative piece of context we can have. But what I really want to dig into is the differences in the outputs here. So let's go full screen into these output parts of the input processor traces. And the big difference I want to point out is, so on the right, we have the one with the input processor being used. On the left, we have the regular version where the query is just in the system prompt. What we have here is injected this data authoritative context here. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can see what this is just some text to inject the query using the input processor. And that's really the big change that we're seeing here, is we're injecting this information on every single turn, so the agent keeps it as sort of its authoritative context and can make sure that it's not overriding any changes that were done before. So just want to dive in super quickly there, and then here I'll close out so we can just focus in on this one. To highlight a few cool things you can do with Mastra and this in mind, and just general observability. So with this in mind now, that this is the trace that I like to see, this is sort of the input output that's actually correct versus the other one was obviously overriding other information. A cool one-click thing I can do is I can save this as a data set item. I can select a data set to save it to, scroll down and save the item. And basically what this does is if I navigate over to data sets, I've put in this new sort of input output use case, which allows me to then run experiments on it. So I can take all these different traces that I know work well and then put them all into its own data set so I can then run an experiment to help build out my evals for all these different agents. So that's a cool, we get a lot of questions about like, how do I set up my evals? How do I make evals? That's one really cool out of the box way with Mastra to do it, is just you go into traces, you take traces that you know are good use cases to be testing, and then in one click, you can just save them as a data set item. And the last thing I want to just highlight on Mastra's end, it's just as it's a new feature that we just released, is this trace intelligence. And so what trace intelligence does is it takes all of your traces and starts to bucket them based on their goal, their outcome, their behavior, and their sentiment. So if you go through and you see all the different traces you have, it takes them and you start to identify patterns across the way they run over time. And you can see the way these patterns sort of change over time. We have simulations to show you how the different groupings evolve. And this is a great way to start to make your traces more actionable, because you may notice that traces with certain goals tend to have certain outcomes or certain behaviors. And this can help you identify different bottlenecks, identify places that are stronger or weaker in terms of your agent's analysis, and overall just create evals that are a lot more actionable. So with that in mind, just wanted to quickly highlight a few things there, but that's pretty much it on my end. I wanted to make sure that we have the main focus on Mora and all the awesome stuff that they're doing. So with that in mind, happy to sort of take any questions from here if there's anything going on in the chat. I know that we had one from early on. This was actually all the way back from the intro, but I'd love to just pass it back to you guys just so you can chat about Mora a little bit. But I believe someone was asking, yeah, how would you compare Mora to a metabase?
Do you want to take this?
Happy to jump in here. So again, that would probably require a little bit more of like a full demo so you actually can see it. But I think it's like, imagine if you took Metabase and you actually built it now from the ground up. So what that means is like, instead of just having, Metabase AI, which is like just like bolted on so you can do like text to SQL, which is what I was explaining on the SQL editor. You can do that, but that same agent can also do everything you need at the dashboard level, right? So for example, it can build your dashboards, it can, move them around. It can, like, imagine you have 20 metrics defined. It can create all of those data sets for you proactively. And thank you, Brandon. It can create all of those data sets for you proactively, update them if your definitions change, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just like a lot more flexible way of doing it than just like Metabase, where like that has been added sort of like much after the fact. Plus a bunch of other good stuff. Like, it's free to use as you start, for now, so you don't have to host it yourself. And a bunch of other like nice little things. But I don't want to like oversell the thing. You can play with it for free at Mora.com if you want to try it out. Oh, and also the UI is much, much faster, by the way. That's another huge thing that I think like, we gloss over. Like, we've rebuilt it on DuckDB as opposed to how Metabase is like built on some like old Java framework. And you'll notice on like just like the loading speed, it's like near instant every interaction. So if you have like board filters, you don't have that spinning wheel of death essentially. So everything should feel super, super fast, which is huge, especially if you're working with, any data set that has like more than 10,000 rows.
Gotcha. Awesome. And then I'll pass along another question here. So how would you handle, it just moved a little bit. How would you handle an out-of-date SQL query generated about a month ago, but a migration change to the structure of a table?
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it doesn't come into play as much to Mastra, and it's much more relevant to how we handle that at Mora. Because like for when we're dealing with like the agents, the SQL query that we have should be written or approved by a user. So if a background thing changes, we won't automatically change that query for the user. What we do though, however, is that we have like a background job that scans the user's database. So when we do figure out that there's like an issue, we flag a SQL query as stale in some way. But like the user or a user would have to tell an agent to update the SQL query to rerun that. But again, this doesn't really come into play with like the input processor, as it's like a problem magnitude above what we're dealing with in terms of like what we pass into like the agent. But in the case that you ran like an outdated SQL query, like the agent would just see that like the SQL query didn't run or something like that, and it just like lets the user know that there's something wrong with like, the SQL query, and ideally it exposes the syntax error or the referencing error in this case that occurred, and the user or agent can then like fix that. Great question.
Awesome.
Though.
And then another one here. As far as I know, the system prompt generally has a higher priority than context for messages. How well do the dumber models handle a mix of query instructions from the system prompt and injected authoritative context? I'll pass this over to you, Eduardo, in a minute. But one thing I would note here, from my understanding, is that like Eduardo mentioned, a lot of this is like recency bias that a lot of these different models may have. So since the input processor is running after it actually checks like the system prompt, I think a lot of models will end up deferring to that. But Eduardo, since you've been like boots on the ground building it out, I'm curious if you've played around with different models, seen any differences in sort of how they interpret this injected authoritative context.
It's a great point, and I think I should have like mentioned it at the beginning. I don't think I did, but yes, I think better models do handle this better. They understand the freshness and like they understand like their own message conversation a little bit better. For this demo, I didn't use like an expensive model because I wanted it to fail. I'm sure if I used like Opus 5 or Sonnet, some of like this bigger models, it would have caught it and it would have like worked fine. But again, I think like the idea with this is like more showing like the flexibility that you can do more with smaller, cheaper models, right? It's funny because like I think even with like cheaper models, you can trick it as well. If you take a look at the system prompt that we pass, we very loosely tell it like, hey, this is like the freshest SQL query. But if you really wanted to, you could like really like all caps lock, hey, only look at this SQL query. Do not look at other SQL queries in like your memory or conversation history. This is the one that you want to look at. It might work. Like I see that work. But you don't necessarily want to rely on your prompting to do that heavy lifting for you. So that's why we've like moved away from something like that where we're like telling it like via the system prompt like, hey, this is the thing that you have to look at, ignore everything else, into a more process structured way of giving it the context. Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be iterating on like maybe like a different model behaves differently. So like your instruction prompt just like doesn't bode well with like a different model. So you really want to have like more flexibility into how you give the relevant parts of what the agent needs. Basically managing context, right? At the end of the day, this is just like managing context. So yeah, but great question. I think it's very relevant to this.
Awesome. And then another question right after that from Sebastian. How well does this work in terms of prompt caching? Is that something you played around with at all?
Yeah. So I mentioned this a bit briefly, but the gist of it is that it depends on the model provider. Different model providers have different ways of doing prompt caching. But this is definitely can be beneficial to prompt caching because you're not modifying the system prompt, meaning that you can cache the whole system prompt. Like imagine on every run of like the thing, you're basically changing like the system prompt. Maybe it doesn't cut the, maybe like your system prompt is long enough that it can be cached before you give it the SQL query. But it means that like a little part of your system prompt is being modified every run, which then causes the prompt caching to not work for some model providers. I'm misremembering now. I think Anthropic does prompt caching automatically. And I think OpenAI, you have to basically tell it like, hey, I want you to like prompt cache like my system prompt up to like this point. Um, so that helps removing that dynamic aspect of the system prompt. Uh, it can hurt, maybe not cache prompting, but it can hurt like your token consumption. Like you will be introducing, as you saw in like in the demo, like uh, it's like a bigger, and again you can modify this. It's like very basically like a secondary system prompt, but in this demo, you would be injecting this on every run. You might not want to do that. Again, that's where like the flexibility comes in because you can decide when you want to run this. Maybe you have like a way of like identifying that the agent already has the most recent thing or it won't collude with its other context. So you might decide not to pass it and you just don't pass it. But in the current setup, this will always be passed and that can eat up some tokens as well. So you have to be careful around that regardless. Great question so
Awesome.
far.
And then one last question. For intelligence traces, is it possible to tweak / customize the types of patterns to segment or collate beyond sentiment, etc.? So right now, in intelligence traces just is in beta and was announced like 5 days ago. So it's very, very new. For now, the way we're doing is we're definitely keeping it locked into these 4 categories, which is the goal, the outcome, the behavior, and the sentiment. And sort of as a higher level thing, a big goal of trace intelligence is that, it's picking out patterns that you wouldn't think of on your own. Like that's a big part of the build out itself, is that the idea is that it's supposed to be generating insights that are unique to sort of the way it's able to bucket all these different things. So in terms of like high level, you can always kind of set up eval structures to try to mirror something like this if there's different buckets you want to tackle. But trace intelligence is definitely more for the use case of kind of picking out things that you probably wouldn't even know to necessarily check for on your own. And especially as you're getting to robust systems where you're not just having a handful of evals, but you have a huge combination of online, offline. You're getting thousands and thousands of different test cases. This can be super, super valuable to almost have a set of like these takeaways that you aren't necessarily you aren't driving yourself, that are being driven independently. But all that being said, take it with a grain of salt because it's super early on. It's in beta. If you want access, feel free to reach out to us and we can see if we can get you on board to test it out. And we're always looking for feedback. So definitely can feel free to let us know if you feel like that'd be something really valuable. Of course, no problem. Well, with that in mind, I think unless there are any last straggling questions, that'll wrap it up for us. Thank you so much to Eduardo and Xavier from the Mora team, and thank you to everyone in the audience for coming through. Before we go, Eduardo, Xavier, is there anywhere you want to point people to? I know you mentioned they can try out the platform for free. If they have any issues, any good way to reach out, anything like that?
Yeah, you can try it for free, Mora.com. When you go through the onboarding process, you can create a Slack channel for free with us. If you have any feedback, support, requests, et cetera, and we're super proactive there. Either us or like someone from the team will help you out pretty immediately. So yeah, try it out. See how Mastra powers a lot of the stuff we've built, and yeah, always happy to help.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This Thursday, we're going to have a workshop with Alex where we're actually going to be going through trace intelligence. I actually probably should mention that before. So for all those questions of trace intelligence, if there are any more, save them for just 2 more days. Join that webinar. It's going to be at 9 a.m. Pacific time. But other than that, hope everyone has a great day, great night, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.